All right, you're welcome back. It's still TVC Breakfast this Monday morning. The more than 25 million persons living with disabilities in Nigeria want adequate consideration during elections.
Now, the Center for Citizens with Disabilities has called on the Independent National Electoral Commission to ensure that the forthcoming Anambra State election and subsequent polls in Nigeria are conducted in the interest of people living with disabilities who want to exercise their rights. And we have right now the Executive Director, Center for Citizens with Disabilities, David Anyele, is with us here in the studio. David, it's good to see you.
It's my pleasure.
It's really been a long while, I must say. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Now, let's talk about this issue now. The people living with disability, the rights they have, how has it been all the while? You have been in the forefront of advocating for people living with disability, and government should do this, provide this, and ensure this, and all of that. How is that coming? Let's even start with that.
Yeah.
What's the response so far?
Yeah, we are getting support. We are getting interested parties indicating interest to take appropriate measure to do the needful. You will recall during Edo and Ondo state governorship elections, we were able to deploy persons with disabilities in all the 18 local government areas of the states as election observers, for them to capture the realities on the ground so as to provide empirical evidence that will support the need to create equal voting access for all. What we saw, we are obvious, that is to say, the access to people with disabilities to the electoral process is still very weak. This stems from our electoral act, our attitudinal behaviors to issues around disability, acknowledging that since the foundation of this country more than 100 years ago, elections has been conducted at their exclusion. An average Nigerian, both the technocrats and politicians, do not understand the definition of a person with disability. So when you are talking about disability, people see it from different perspectives, economical, social, otherwise. However, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is explicit about who is a person with disabilities, whose impairment with interaction with various barriers can hinder the individuals from, participating on equal basis with other members of the society, is a person with disability. And that is why we feel that there is need for us to attract the attention of not just INEC, but also the National Assembly, who make appropriations, who pass legislation, including other stakeholders, especially the media, for them to understand the real definition of disability and what access to the electoral process is all about.
Okay, well, of course, we'd like you to break it down. Now, the INEC chairman, Mahmoud Yakubu, has, in the case of Anambra election, which is coming up November 18, he said people living with disability, or PWDs, should, ensure that they actually participate in this election in every way possible. But do you think enough really is being done to ensure accessibility, like you just cited the UN Convention right now? Let me even put this, UN Declaration of Accessibility for PWDs, the built-up environment should be barrier-free and adapted to fulfill the needs of all people. So how true is this in the case of Nigeria?
The case of Nigeria is that our social infrastructures remains inaccessible to people with disabilities. The fact is that more than 99.5% of social infrastructures of MDAs in Nigeria across states are not accessible to people with disabilities. The academic institutions or schools where they normally use for these election purposes are not accessible to people with disabilities. And we are asking them to understand what access is all about. The moment you understand what access is all about, then you begin to think about where to position your, your polling unit, where to site polling unit, where to site, election activities, so as to ensure that no one is left behind. The reason is simple. While we were in Anambra last week, an average person with disabilities says that he wants to vote, he wants to participate, but they are worried. They are worried where the, polling units are going to be sited. They are worried whether there will be sign language interpreter that will guide them in all the television and advertorial around the election on what to do for a deaf person. They are worried if, as a blind person, if they can get a braille material that can help them in such a way that they will understand their role and responsibility. They are worried that in all these conversations around elections in Anambra, that issues of disability remain silent because what you hear, women, women, women. And when you hear women, the next is youth. After youth, they close up the discussion. Then the people with disabilities remain vulnerable. Nobody speaks for them. Nobody raises their issues. As such, they become the most vulnerable of the vulnerable social group. That is why they are worried. As for their participation, they are willing. They are also concerned about the security agencies. Look at what happened during elections. You know, elections in Nigeria is always crowded. And because it's always crowded, most times the security agencies tend to organize, voters in such a way that they will vote stress-free. However, especially when you are trying to organize and a deaf person is not hearing you that you are organizing, I don't know if you understand. You're asking people to go back.
INEC really has a job.
So you discover that the deaf person will not know that what you're saying. At the end of the day, they brutalize them. And I raised this issue with the Inspector General of Police. And I asked him that there is time now for the Nigerian police to begin to train your officers and men on how to manage disability issues, because that is where the bulk of the problem also comes from. And he assured me that he's going to do it, but this is an average government officials likes to sometimes play along this issue. So what we are saying is that there is need to sensitize stakeholders on the needs of people with disabilities. It's not enough to come out and say people with disabilities are asked to come out en masse. En masse to do what? Can they get access? What access? What provisions have you made? I learned that this week INEC is going to train their electoral officers for Anambra State. Who knows what is the curriculum of the training materials? Is disability issues properly factored? So these are where the issues are. If adequate arrangement is not properly made, it becomes a problem. That is why we are asking INEC, beyond saying PWD should move, you should equally be telling them what you have done in order to ensure that they have stress-free voting exercise. All
right. Now, you said earlier that the PWDs are ready and are willing. If we have to take, because Anambra State is going to be like the litmus test. Let's test how involved it can and how it's going to work and all of that. On the ideal basis, in what ways really are PWDs meant to be involved in the Anambra process? What can they really do if the ground is level for them to?
What they can do is to raise their issues, speak for themselves. That is to say, encourage all actors to factor the issues around living with disabilities in Anambra State. Because as I said earlier, an average Nigerian politician do not understand who is a person with disability. So when we talk about disability, what they are thinking about, oh, give them wheelchair, give them clutches, oh, dash them a bag of rice.
And that takes care of it.
It's beyond that. These guys want to participate in the political process of this country. In fact, they want to be governors. They also want to be members of the parliament. So if they want to be members of the parliament, if they want to be, members of the executive of the state, then, the issues around their participation will be clear. One of the challenge we are having, my brother, is that there is no law that criminalizes discrimination on the grounds of disability. For the past 16 years, more than, we have been clamoring for criminalization of discrimination on the grounds of disability in this country. The parliament, the National Assembly, have passed more than 3 times. More than 3 times, the disability bill. However, both President Olusegun Obasanjo, former, and former President Goodluck Jonathan denied us assent to this disability bill. As I speak to you, the National Assembly, the 8th National Assembly, under the leadership of Senator Bukola Saraki, have also passed the disability bill into law. We are asking them to harmonize this disability bill speedily. We are asking them to take appropriate measure to ensure that this bill, after harmonization, is transmitted to the president for assent. Because President Muhammadu Buhari promised us in Nasarawa State that he's going to sign the disability bill into law. So where there is no law that control the behavior of state and non-state actors around disability development, or in particular elections, people with disabilities will continue to struggle and struggle to participate. Yes. In Anambra State in particular, people with disabilities are also struggling to get a legislation that will protect them from harmful practices. As I speak to you in Anambra State, the disability bill is still in the parliament, and the people are lobbying. The feedback we are getting from persons with disabilities in Anambra State is that the parliamentarians are asking them to come and lobby. And I asked them, what is their own definition of lobbying? And what we are hearing is that they should bring money. How can a person with disabilities bring money to come and, to come and, lobby a politician whose responsibility is to protect the weak and vulnerable in the society? So it becomes a worrisome situation. That is why I'm using this platform to call on the Speaker of Anambra State Assembly to take appropriate measure to ensure that that disability bill is passed into law between now and before the election, so that all actors in Anambra State will begin to behave in such a way that Nigeria will be respected across the world. And
of course, the PWDs have been asking for a review or reform of the Electoral Act. When you look at the voter's card, for example, it doesn't show anywhere where you indicate whether you're a person living with any kind of disability or not. Is that where it really should start from?
This is part of the places where it's supposed to be starting from. That is to say that the Electoral Act, in particular, Section 56. Section 56 makes provision on how to, the role of a person with disabilities who is coming to elections, what is supposed to do. But they are only interested in the blind people. And blind are not the majority in the disability fraternity in this country. It is the physically challenged. When we talk about persons with disabilities, we are talking about the blind, the physically challenged, the deaf, the intellectual, persons with intellectual disabilities, the persons who is a leprosy survivor, and others. These are people we are talking about. And there are different forms of disability. But the Electoral Act only concentrated on the blind. So we're asking them that Section 56 should be amended to open space for more, protection of persons who are physically challenged, so that they will participate in the electoral process on equal basis with others. We have done that. We've even asked them, we have made contribution during the Kenneth Namandi, electoral, reform committee exercise. And we made all this, clear. So these are the issues. It doesn't take any rocket science for you to amend this.
But obviously, there is no one solution that can solve all of the problems, because the disabilities, just like you stated, are in various degrees and in different, some are visually challenged, physically challenged, intellectually, and all of that. How do you think INEC can actually, or every other stakeholder, whether it's the lawmakers and the rest of them, aggregate the laws in such a way that it will apply to everyone without necessarily, picking each disability to take care of it?
The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is there as a guide,
okay,
for what needs to be done. Don't forget, Nigeria is not the only country in the world that is implementing elections and persons with disabilities. In Uganda, persons with disabilities have every right to participate. In South Africa, the same. In Ghana, the same. Only in Nigeria, not only in Nigeria, but one of the countries in the world, that people with disabilities struggle much more to participate, as if we are doing rocket science. What we are saying is this, that INEC should take appropriate measure to ensure that their disability policy is periodized in such a way that it will be adopted and with adequate budgetary provisions made. Because one thing is this: you may design a policy without backing it up with appropriation. I don't know if you understand. The operationalization of this policy becomes worrisome. It becomes a paper that cannot address any issue. So beyond securing disability policy by INEC, INEC should begin to conduct audit of their processes. That is to say, to appreciate the gap around disability, so as to show that they cover it. It is after this audit that INEC will begin to make budgetary provision. The budgetary provision will guide them to see this is where we are starting, this is where we are going to end, and then for entry point, to recognize that participation of people with disability in the electoral process is sacrosanct. Without that, Nigeria will be missing, people with disability will be alienated, they will not participate, and it is the bulk of the highest level of discrimination. Denial of participation in selecting those who will take charge of your issue is the worst form of discrimination.
All right, David Anyele, Executive Director, Center for Citizens with Disabilities. Thank you so much for coming this morning.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.